All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into bodybuilding nutrition. And to guide us, we've got Skip La Cour's book, La Cour's Bodybuilding Nutrition.
Yeah, so we want to make this really practical for you and help you get those awesome results building muscle, losing fat, or doing both. And, La Cour's had so much experience with this. He's seen every question, worked with bodybuilders of all levels, so there's a lot to learn from him.
Right, he wanted to clear up all the confusion out there.
Yeah.
And, give people a clear path.
Yeah, and it's like the principles are pretty straightforward, but actually doing them consistently, like putting in the work, that's where the real challenge lies.
It's not a magic trick, it's a lifestyle.
Yeah, it is.
So in this deep dive, we're going to cover all the essentials. We'll talk about why nutrition is so crucial for reaching your physique goals. Break down the roles of protein, carbs, and fats. Figure out how many calories you actually need, how often you should be eating, and then get into specific strategies for gaining muscle and losing fat.
Sounds like a plan.
All right, let's start with the basics. Why is nutrition so important for building a better physique?
Well, what you eat has a huge impact on your body. Like, you'll often hear experts say that nutrition is like 80% of your results. So, yeah, it's a big deal.
80%. That's more than just hitting the gym, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, La Cour, he's really clear about this. He even says if he had to pick between training and eating right to get in his best shape, he'd pick eating right.
That's a pretty strong statement.
It shows you just how important it is,
It does. And he talks about how many bodybuilders, like even those who are super dedicated, they struggle with nutrition, they just don't know what to eat,
Right. There's so much information out there, and it can be overwhelming.
It can be. So he brings up a really interesting question, though. Is the problem really understanding all the little details of nutrition? Or is it about consistently following what we already know works?
Yeah, that's a good point. Most people know that eating balanced meals, lots of protein, less junk food, that's good for you. The challenge is sticking to it, resisting those temptations, and actually making time to eat regularly, especially with our busy lives.
Exactly. It's easy to get caught up in the moment.
Oh, yeah.
Enjoy that delicious food, even if it's not the best choice. But La Cour, he believes that if you're truly motivated, if you know why you want to eat a certain way, then the how becomes much easier.
That's definitely true.
All right, so let's talk about what he calls the 3 fundamental keys to bodybuilding nutrition.
Okay, so first, you got to understand what protein, carbs, and fats actually do in your body. Then you got to figure out the right amount of each for you, the percentages. And finally, you got to figure out how many calories you need overall.
Okay, let's start with protein. That seems to be like the king of bodybuilding foods, right?
It is. If you're trying to build muscle, you got to eat enough protein. As La Cour says, muscle is protein, protein is muscle. You're literally building your muscles from the protein you eat.
So if you don't eat enough, you're not giving your body the building blocks it needs.
Exactly. It's like trying to build a house without bricks, You're not going to get very far.
Makes sense. Now, what about carbs? They seem to get a lot of mixed messages. Good for energy, bad for weight gain.
Right, but carbs are your body's main fuel source. They give you energy for your workouts and everything else you do. And importantly, your brain needs them to function properly.
I've heard that if you don't eat enough carbs, your body can start breaking down muscle for fuel.
Yeah, that's right. So you got to eat enough carbs to prevent that muscle breakdown. But on the flip side, if you eat too many carbs, your body will store them as fat.
So it's all about balance.
Exactly.
Now, there's all this talk about timing your carb intake around your workouts. Eating carbs before for energy or after for recovery. What's La Cour's take on this?
He thinks the timing isn't as crucial as just making sure you eat the right amount of carbs overall throughout the day. He even says he used to eat carbs before bed when prepping for competitions, and he was still super lean.
So it's more about the total amount, not so much when you eat them.
Right.
So how does he recommend figuring out how many carbs to eat?
So his approach is, protein first. Make sure you're getting enough of that for muscle growth. Then he keeps his fat intake in check, especially when he's trying to get lean. And then he basically adjusts his carbs within his daily calorie goal. He says it's like sandwiching the carbs between protein and fat.
Okay, that's a helpful way to think about it.
Yeah.
Now, what about fats? They get a lot of bad press, but La Cour says they're essential, right?
They are. They're important for so many things, like they're part of your cell memory. Certain vitamins. So yeah, healthy fats are super important.
What about the amount? How much fat should we be aiming for?
Most experts recommend around 26 to 30% of your total calories from fat. And it's important to know the difference between good fats and bad fats. Saturated fats are the ones you want to limit. Unsaturated fats are the good guys.
Okay, good to know. So we've covered the roles of protein, carbs, and fats. What about the right ratio of those? Is there a magic number that works for everyone?
La Cour says there's no one-size-fits-all answer. The ideal ratio depends on your body, your metabolism, your goals. Whether you want to build muscle, lose fat, or both. You kind of have to experiment and see what works best for you.
So don't get too hung up on trying to find the perfect percentage.
Yeah, he says a small difference, like 5 or 10%, isn't going to make a huge difference in the long run, especially if it keeps you from actually starting and being consistent.
What's his personal approach to macronutrient ratios?
So protein is always his top priority. He makes sure he gets enough of that, then enough carbs to fuel his workouts, and then he adjusts his fat intake based on how lean he wants to get. He usually aims for about 55% protein, 30% carbs, and 15% fat.
Okay, makes sense. Now, the big question everyone wants to know, how many calories should you actually eat each day?
Yeah, that's a common question. And it can be confusing because you see bodybuilders eating like anywhere from 2,500 to 10,000 calories a day. It's like, where do you even start?
Where do you?
So the first step is figuring out your maintenance level. This is the amount of calories you need to stay at your current weight. If you want to gain weight, you got to eat more than that. If you want to lose weight, you got to eat less.
I've heard about the Harris-Benedict equation. Does that help figure this out?
It can. It's a formula that estimates your resting metabolic rate, like how many calories you burn just by existing. Yeah. You then multiply that by an activity factor, and that gives you your approximate maintenance level. But it's just an estimate. Everyone's different.
Right. It's a starting point.
Yeah.
Now, La Cour also has a more straightforward approach.
Yeah.
He calls Skip La Cour's simple way. What's that about?
So this is for people who just want to get started without overthinking things. Basically, get a good food list and book that shows you calories and macros for different foods. Decide on your macro percentages. Figure out how many meals you can realistically eat each day. And then just pick a daily calorie target that makes sense for your goals, divide it by the number of meals, and boom, there's your calorie goal per meal.
So it's about taking action, right? Not getting stuck in analysis paralysis.
Exactly. You can always adjust your calories later based on how you're looking and feeling.
Okay, so we got calories figured out. Now, what about how often we should be eating? How many meals a day is best for bodybuilders?
Well, it depends on your schedule and how many calories you need to eat. But generally, smaller, more frequent meals are better. He suggests at least 5 meals a day, spaced no more than 3 hours apart.
And La Cour himself, he eats even more frequently than that, right?
Yeah, he's a big believer in frequent meals. He eats 8 meals a day, every 2 hours. It's a lot, but he's dedicated. He believes that by eating more often, your body can process the nutrients better.
So you're basically giving your body a steady stream of fuel throughout the day.
Exactly.
And he provides an example of his typical meal plan.
He does. It's all about the basics, Egg whites, oatmeal, protein powder, meal replacements, chicken breasts, salads. Simple and effective.
Okay, so now let's talk about specific eating strategies. Starting with building muscle. What's his main advice for that?
Basically, don't eat to get fat. Don't eat to stay lean. Eat to grow. Eat enough to fuel muscle growth, but not so much that you put on a ton of fat.
And he recommends that 553015 macro split again.
Yeah, as a starting point. And he walks you through how to calculate how much of each macro you need in grams based on your calorie goal.
So we're talking protein, carbs, and fats all measured out.
Exactly.
And he really emphasizes the importance of protein, doesn't he?
He does. Protein is like the holy grail of muscle building. You got to make sure you're eating enough of it consistently.
There's that phrase, positive nitrogen balance. What's that all about?
It means you need to eat more protein than your body is breaking down. You got to have a surplus of those building blocks for muscle growth.
So how much protein is enough? We hear so many different recommendations.
He says it varies for everyone, but a good starting point is 1 to 1.5 grams of protein per pound of body weight. Then adjust based on how you're responding.
What about that old formula of multiplying your weight in kilograms by 1.5? Is that still valid?
He thinks it's a bit outdated, especially for serious lifters.
And he has this interesting theory about protein consumption windows of opportunity. What's that all about?
So it's not just about how much protein you eat in a day, but how often you eat it. He says your body can only process so much protein at once. So if you spread your protein intake out over more meals, you give your body more chances to utilize it.
So instead of having a huge steak once a day, it's better to have smaller portions of protein more frequently.
Exactly. It's about maximizing those protein consumption windows.
Now, a lot of people worry about eating too much protein, especially for their kidneys. What's La Cour's take on that?
So he's been eating a lot of protein for a long time, and he hasn't had any kidney problems. He says the concern is that high protein might put more stress on your kidneys, but he hasn't seen any solid research that supports this in healthy, hydrated people.
So it's probably fine as long as you're drinking enough water.
Yeah, staying hydrated is important for lots of reasons.
Now, what about bulking up? Is it really necessary to eat a ton of calories to gain muscle?
There's definitely debate about that. Some people say you gotta bulk to gain muscle. Others say you can stay lean and still grow. La Cour leans towards the stay lean approach.
So he doesn't think you need to get super fat to build muscle.
No, he thinks that eating a lot of extra calories, especially from fat, just makes it harder to get lean later on.
And he thinks you can get all the benefits of bulking, like feeling energized and preventing muscle breakdown, by just eating consistently throughout the day.
Right.
Okay, now let's talk about losing fat. What are the principles there?
The basic principle is calories in versus calories out. To lose fat, you got to burn more calories than you eat.
So it's about creating a calorie deficit.
Exactly. A pound of fat is about 3,500 calories. So if you want to lose a pound a week, you need to burn 500 extra calories each day.
But he says you shouldn't expect to see results overnight.
Right. The weight you lose at the beginning is mostly water weight, not fat. And your body tries to hold on to fat. It's a survival mechanism.
So you got to be patient and consistent.
Definitely. And he really emphasizes that there are no quick fixes or magic pills for fat loss.
It all comes down to hard work and discipline.
It does. And he doesn't think the specific macro ratios matter as much as just making sure you're in a calorie deficit.
So whether you're doing low fat, high fat, keto, whatever, it's all about the calories.
Yeah.
He has a really interesting point about starchy carbs.
Yeah, he says that even when you're eating healthy carbs like rice and pasta, it's easy to overeat them. They're calorie dense and tasty, so the portions can add up quickly.
And he found that when people cut back on those starchy carbs, they tended to lose fat more effectively.
Yeah, he's not saying carbs are bad, but it's something to be mindful of, especially those starchy carbs.
Okay, so now the big question. Can you build muscle and lose fat at the same time?
La Cour says absolutely yes.
He is confident about that.
He is. But you got to be strategic. You still got to lift heavy to challenge those muscles. You got to eat enough protein, and you got to be careful with your calorie intake.
So it's a delicate balance.
It is. He even suggests a carb cycling strategy where you alternate between days of mostly veggies for carbs and days with some grains. It can be tough, but it can work.
Okay, now let's talk about metabolism. A lot of people struggle with what they think is a slow metabolism.
Right. La Cour says there are things you can do, both with your diet and your mindset. Procedurally, you can eat less overall, rotate your calories, eat more frequently, cut back on starchy carbs and fats, maybe replace some carbs with healthy fats, try just veggie carbs for a while, do more cardio, do cardio in the morning, maybe try some thermogenic supplements. But mentally, you got to focus on what you can control.
Don't compare yourself to others.
Exactly. And he talks about how his own metabolism slowed down as he got older. But the principles still apply. You got to adjust and keep working at it.
Now, what about people with fast metabolisms? Is that always a good thing?
It has its own challenges. They got to eat a lot more food to meet their needs. It can be time-consuming, expensive, and tough to fit in all those meals. But the principles are the same.
La Cour really emphasizes keeping things simple, doesn't he?
He does. He's all about simple, effective meals, especially when you're dieting for a competition. It's not about gourmet cooking. It's about fueling your body for your goals. He says if you're hungry and focused, even plain food can taste good.
So it's about mindset, right?
It is. And he eats the same foods pretty much every day just to keep things simple and consistent.
And consistency is key, right?
Huge. He says bodybuilding nutrition is a lifestyle. You can't just eat well on training days. You got to be consistent, especially if you're a natural bodybuilder prepping for a show.
It's about building those habits.
It is.
And he points out that good nutrition has benefits beyond just how you look.
Yeah, it impacts your whole life. Your energy levels, your mood, your mental clarity, how you perform in everything you do. It's worth the effort.
Now, he shares a really interesting story about good fats and a lesson he learned the hard way.
Yeah, he used to think that all fat was bad, that classic mindset. But then he talked to Paul Dillett, this IFBB pro, and Dillett told him to eat more good fats like guacamole and cut back on carbs.
And he was hesitant at first.
Yeah, he thought, why change what's been working? But later he realized he'd actually done something similar when he'd followed the zone diet.
So he'd already experienced the benefits of good fats without realizing it.
Right.
And what was Dillett's reasoning behind the good fats?
So Dillett said that good fats give you slow-burning energy without the insulin spikes from carbs. So you don't store as much fat, and it keeps your muscles full. And it might even help you burn that deep, stubborn fat.
Interesting.
Yeah. And La Cour, he kind of regrets not listening to Dillett sooner. He thinks it might have helped him win another championship.
But he's using good fats now, right?
Yeah, he's got a new diet plan that incorporates canola oil, especially in the early stages of his contest prep.
Okay, good to know. He also talks a lot about drinking water.
Water is essential. Your body's mostly water, and muscles are like 70% water. It's important for everything. Building muscle, digestion, nutrient absorption, flushing toxins, even making supplements work better.
Yeah.
And it can help prevent injuries.
How much water does he drink?
He aims for at least 2 gallons a day, and even more when he's prepping for a show. He even gets spring water delivered to his house. He recommends at least 1 gallon a day for everyone.
That's a lot of water.
It is, but he has a tip for making it easier. Add a little bit of Crystal Light or something similar to give it some flavor.
Okay, that's a good tip. Now, here's something that might surprise people. He recommends adding salt to your meals.
Yeah, salt gets a bad rap, but he thinks it can be helpful for bodybuilders. He says it helps transport nutrients into the muscles. And he doesn't think it causes high blood pressure if you're healthy and drinking enough water.
So it's about balance, right? Salt and water.
Right.
And he says the extra water weight from the salt can actually be beneficial.
Yeah, it can make you feel stronger, help prevent injuries, and it's easy to lose when you need to. Unlike fat, which takes a lot longer to shed.
Now, getting shredded while maintaining muscle, that's the holy grail for many bodybuilders. La Cour says it's all about heart.
Yeah, he means you gotta have that mental toughness, that discipline to endure hunger and keep training hard. It's not easy, especially for natural bodybuilders.
And he has a pretty strong statement about missing meals.
Yeah, he says, once you've missed a meal, it's gone forever. You can't just make up for it later. It's a missed opportunity for growth.
So consistency is paramount.
Absolutely.
He talks about this fat-burning mode and how you should learn to love it.
Yeah, it's not always comfortable, but those sensations, that constant slight hunger, the sunken face, the increased body temperature, the sweating, those are signs that you're burning fat.
So don't be afraid of those feelings.
Embrace them.
And how do you know if you're actually losing muscle?
He asks, are you really lean enough to know the difference between muscle loss and water loss or fat loss? You might just be depleted of glycogen, which makes you look flat. He says muscle loss isn't inevitable. It starts with good nutrition. Enough protein, intense training, proper recovery.
So focus on what you can control.
Exactly.
Now, cheat days, we all love them. How does he recommend approaching them?
He says plan them in advance. Don't just give in to cravings randomly. That way you feel more in control. You've earned that cheat meal.
So it becomes a reward for your hard work.
Yeah.
He also talks about the bodybuilding triad.
Yes. That's his way of visualizing the 3 essential elements: nutrition, training, and rest. And he puts nutrition at the top, emphasizing its importance.
It all starts with what you eat.
Right.
And he gives his top 10 nutrition tips.
Yeah. Know your why. Keep it simple, be consistent, prioritize protein, focus on calories for fat loss, pay attention to how you process carbs, use the mirror, plan ahead, use meal replacements, and plan your cheat days.
All solid advice.
It is. And he even gives sample meal plans for different goals.
He does. And he gives tips for eating well when you're busy, which is a challenge for everyone these days.
Yeah, be organized, use convenient containers, carry water, pre-cook meals, use kitchen gadgets, don't be afraid of frozen veggies, keep meals simple, eat enough, use meal replacements, and have backup food on hand.
All great tips.
They are.
So what are the key takeaways from this deep dive into Skip La Cour's bodybuilding nutrition principles?
I think the most important things to remember are motivation, understanding those macronutrients and calories, that protein consumption window idea, the strategies for gaining muscle and losing fat, including those good fats, water, and even salt, and then the need for consistency and planning, even when you're busy.
It's simple, but not always easy.
Right. Like you said, the principles are straightforward, but the real challenge is putting in the work.
So think about what you've learned today. What's one or two things you can start doing right now to improve your nutrition? How can you make this work for you and your goals? Pay attention to how you feel. Make adjustments. Keep learning. It's a journey.